He chained his pregnant wife every night, unaware her father is the Mafia boss who's been hunting him 4 years. Chapter 1. The Golden Cage: What Love Looks Like from the Outside. The neighborhood of Cedarwood Hills was the kind of place where hedges were trimmed on Wednesdays and cars were washed on Sundays, where neighbors waved from driveways and children played on manicured lawns. It was, by every visible measure, a perfect place to live. And the house at 14 Oleander Drive was the most perfect house on the most perfect street. It had cream-colored walls and a wraparound porch, a garden of white roses that a landscaping crew maintained every 2 weeks, a gleaming black SUV in the driveway, wind chimes above the front door that sang whenever the breeze came through. From the outside, it was a dream. From the inside, it was a prison. Nadia had learned to count her freedoms the way a starving person counts their last grains of rice. She was allowed to cook. She was allowed to clean. She was allowed to sit by the window between the hours of 2 and 4 in the afternoon, when the light came through at an angle that made the roses in the garden glow like something sacred. She was not allowed to open the front door. She was not allowed to use the telephone without her husband standing beside her. She was not allowed to sleep without the sound of the lock clicking into place. She was 27 years old and 6 months pregnant, and she had forgotten what her own laughter sounded like. Victor Hale came home every evening at precisely 7 o'clock. He would park the SUV, remove his suit jacket, drape it over his left arm, always his left arm, and walk through the front door with the expression of a man who had fought the world all day and won. He was handsome in the way that danger is sometimes handsome. Sharp jaw, careful eyes, a smile that appeared and disappeared like a light being switched on and off by someone who controlled the switch. Nadia. He would say her name the way a man says the name of something he owns. Victor. She had trained herself to smile back. It was survival. Dinner was always served at 7:30. Nadia had learned early in their 2-year marriage that tardiness at the table was an offense Victor cataloged carefully and paid back slowly. She had learned this not from being told, but from the first time she had been 5 minutes late, when he had simply sat across from her in silence for the entire meal, and then, as he rose from the table, pressed his hand against her wrist hard enough to leave a bracelet of bruises that lasted 9 days. He had never apologized. He had brought her flowers the next morning, which was somehow worse. "Are you feeling?" he asked that evening, gesturing toward her rounded belly with his fork, the way one might gesture toward a valuable object on a shelf. "Fine," she said. "The baby was kicking this afternoon." "Good." He returned to his food. "A strong child, that's what we need." We, as though this were a partnership, as though this were love. At 10 o'clock every night, Victor would come to the bedroom door. He would do it casually, the way a man performs a routine he has rehearsed until it feels natural. He would carry 2 things, a glass of water which he would set on her nightstand, and a length of reinforced nylon cord which he would attach to the bedpost and loop around her ankle. The first time Nadia had screamed, Victor had sat on the edge of the bed, watching her scream herself out, his expression patient and clinical as though waiting for a storm to pass. When she was exhausted, when her voice had gone hoarse and her hands were shaking, he had said, very quietly, "You will not scream again. And you will not try to leave, because if you do, they will find you. And you know what happens to people they find." She had not known who they were. She had been too afraid to ask. She had not screamed again. What Victor did not know, what he could not have known, because he had never bothered to learn it, was that Nadia thought constantly. In the hours between midnight and dawn, while the cord lay loose around her ankle and Victor slept beside her like a man with no conscience to disturb his rest, Nadia thought. She thought about who she had been before. A girl who had grown up in Lagos, who had been quick with mathematics, who had wanted to study law. A girl whose mother had died when she was 12, leaving her in the care of an uncle who had done his best, and a father she had never known. A father she had never known. She pressed her hand against her belly. The baby shifted. Hold on, she whispered to it. Just hold on a little longer. She did not yet know how close salvation already was. She did not yet know that in a city 300 miles away, a man had been searching for her for 27 years. She did not yet know that the man her husband was currently building a criminal empire against was, in fact, her father, and that her father had finally found her trail. Chapter 2. The night everything broke, even the strongest chains have a breaking point, asterisk it happened on a Thursday. Nadia had been standing at the kitchen counter at 11 in the morning, slicing onions for a stew she did not want to make, when the pain came. It started low in her back, a deep, grinding pressure that she initially ignored because her body had been producing new varieties of pain for months, and she had learned to simply absorb them. But this one did not stop. It built like a wave that keeps arriving, each one higher than the last, until she was gripping the counter with both hands and breathing in the deliberate, controlled way she had read about in the pregnancy book Victor allowed her to keep on the nightstand, the only book in the house, the only one he had judged harmless enough. She waited for it to pass. It did not pass. By noon, she was on the kitchen floor. The ambulance came because Mrs. Adami from 3 doors down had happened to be walking past and had seen Nadia through the window, a shape collapsed on the tile, and had hammered on the front door until it became clear no one was coming, and then had called emergency services with the efficient urgency of a woman who had raised 5 children and recognized a crisis when she saw one. Victor was in a meeting 40 minutes away. His phone rang 6 times before he answered. There was a medical situation, the paramedic said. Your wife has been taken to Cedarwood General. She's stable, but the baby. Victor had already hung up and was moving toward his car. Nadia woke in a hospital bed with a needle in her arm and monitors beside her that beeped with the reassuring rhythm of proof that you are alive. A nurse with a face like someone's grandmother was adjusting something near the IV stand. Your baby is okay, the nurse said immediately, before Nadia could speak. They did an emergency procedure. You had a placental abruption. It was serious, but you're both stable. Nadia closed her eyes. Something moved in her chest that was not quite crying and not quite prayer, but somewhere between the two. Long have I been here? 14 hours. The nurse, her badge read asterisk Gloria MENSAH RN paused. Your husband is in the waiting room. He's been told you need complete rest. No stress. She said these last 2 words with a particular emphasis, looking directly at Nadia over the rim of her glasses. Nadia understood. Thank you, she said. Gloria Mensa nodded once, the way women who know things nod at other women who know things. On the second day, a junior doctor came to complete a routine blood panel. He was young, distracted, clearly overworked, and he muttered as he filled in his tablet that they would run a comprehensive workup including blood typing and genetic markers given the nature of the emergency. Nadia said nothing. She stared at the ceiling. On the third day, the senior consultant came, Dr. Priya Akafor. She was a precise woman in her 50s with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and the expression of someone who has seen enough of life to be neither easily surprised nor easily shaken. She closed the door behind her. She sat in the chair beside the bed. She set a printed report on the blanket over Nadia's knees. I need to ask you some questions, she said, and I need you to know that whatever you tell me stays in this room. Nadia looked at the report. She could not yet read what it said, but something in the way Dr. Akafor held herself, the careful stillness of a person managing a significant piece of information, made Nadia's heart begin to beat faster. What is it? Your blood panel came back with some unusual markers. We cross-referenced them against the National Medical Database as standard procedure during high-risk maternal cases. Dr. Akafor paused. Are you aware that you were listed as a missing person? That you were reported missing 22 years ago by your maternal family? And that a secondary search was registered 11 years ago by, she glanced at the report, a man named Emmanuel Osai. The name landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water, asterisk Osai. Her mother's name, her name before Victor had made her take his. I don't know that name, Nadia said slowly, but her hands were trembling. He is, Dr. Akafor said, her voice remaining perfectly level, the regional head of one of the largest private security and intelligence networks in West Africa. His organization has been formally flagged by 3 different governments. She paused. He is also registered in the database as your biological father. Monitors beeped. Outside the window, it was raining. Inside Nadia, something that had been locked for a very long time began slowly to open. Chapter 3. The name in the dark, she was never who he thought she was. Asterisk Gloria Mensa was, as it happened, not simply a nurse. She had been a nurse for 31 years, which meant she was also a student of human beings. And in those 31 years, she had developed a precise and unsentimental ability to recognize the difference between a woman who had chosen her circumstances and a woman who had been placed in them by force. Nadia was the second kind. Gloria had noticed the bruising on her wrists during the first examination, documented it carefully and completely in the medical record, and then gone to stand in the corridor for 3 minutes with her hands clasped, deciding what she was going to do about it. She had gone to Dr. Akafor. Dr. Akafor had gone to the medical database. And now the two of them sat together in the records office on the 4th floor, while the file of Emmanuel Osei loaded on the screen, and neither of them said anything for a long time. The file was not supposed to be accessible to a regional hospital database. The fact that it was accessible, that it appeared automatically, attached to Nadia's blood markers, flagged and underlined in red, told both women something without words, that the man named Emmanuel Osei had arranged for it to be accessible. That he had, at some point in the last 27 years, seeded his daughter's biological information into every database he could reach, specifically so that if she ever turned up in a hospital, a clinic, a prison, a morgue, the connection would be made. He's been looking for her entire life, Gloria said quietly. Yes, Dr. Akafor said, a pause. Her husband comes to visit every day, Gloria said. He times it, exactly 45 minutes. He sits by the bed and he speaks to her in a very particular way. The way a warden speaks to an inmate. Gloria straightened her glasses. He has also asked twice for her medical records, won't receive them. But he will eventually take her home. Gloria looked at the screen. Unless someone acts before that happens. Dr. Akafor was already reaching for her phone. Nadia in her hospital room was performing her own calculations. She had asked Gloria, carefully and quietly, to bring her something to write with. Gloria had brought a notepad and a pen without asking why. Nadia had spent the better part of an afternoon writing in her small, precise handwriting everything she remembered, every name, every address, every transaction she had overheard Victor conducting in the office he kept locked on the 2nd floor of the house, every phone call. Every face she had seen come and go through the back entrance of their home in the years she had lived there. She had a very good memory. Victor had never accounted for that. She filled 11 pages. She folded them carefully, placed them inside the pregnancy book, still in her bag, the only personal item she'd had with her when the ambulance came, and she lay back against the pillows and thought about a man named Emmanuel Osei, her father. The word felt foreign and enormous, like a country she had only read about and never visited. A father who ran an intelligence network. A father who had been searching for her for 27 years. A father who, if the medical records were correct, had never stopped. Victor arrived at 4:15 on the 5th day, 17 minutes earlier than usual, which told Nadia his patience was running out. He sat in the chair beside her bed with his jacket folded over his knee and his phone face down on his thigh, and he looked at her with the expression he used when he was deciding something. Doctor says you can come home in 3 days, he said. Yes. Arranged for a nurse to come to the house. He said this as though it were a gift, as though a private nurse in a private prison were something to be grateful for. That's thoughtful, Nadia said. He looked at her for a long moment. Victor was, among other things, a man who prided himself on reading people. It was how he had survived in the business he was in, importing pharmaceutical equipment, his business card said, though the equipment in question was rarely pharmaceutical in any conventional sense. He had built his operation on the ability to know what a person was thinking before they said it. He looked at Nadia and he thought, she is frightened. She is grateful. She is compliant. Asterisk, he was wrong on all 3 counts. But he couldn't know that. He had never learned the first thing about her. Good, he said, and picked up his phone and stopped paying attention to his wife. 3 days, Nadia thought. I have 3 days. Chapter 4. The escape in the rain she ran with nothing but her life and her child's. Gloria Mensa had a daughter who drove a taxi. Her name was Comfort and she was 24, and she had inherited her mother's expression, the kind that gives nothing away. The plan was simple, because the best plans are simple. On the morning of the third day, the day Victor was coming to collect Nadia, Comfort would be parked in the hospital's service vehicle bay at 6:30 in the morning. Gloria would come to Nadia's room at 6:15 during the shift change. The one window in the hospital day when the corridor outside the private ward was minimally staffed. She would bring Nadia's discharge papers, already signed by Dr. Akafer, who had dated them the previous evening. They would go down the service elevator. They would go out through the loading bay. Comfort would drive. What the plan did not account for was that Victor, whose instincts had kept him alive and free for 15 years in an industry where both were difficult to maintain, had sent someone to watch the hospital at night. He hadn't told Nadia this, because he didn't tell Nadia things. He hadn't told her that he had been growing increasingly uneasy about the extended hospital stay, about the way the doctors had stopped letting him see her records, about the expression on the senior nurse's face whenever he arrived on the ward. Victor catalogued discomfort the way some men collect receipts, and lately the stack had been getting high. The man he sent was named Remy. He sat in a gray car in the hospital parking structure from 10 in the evening until 6 in the morning, watching the main entrance. He was watching the main entrance. He was not watching the service bay. At 6:12, 3 minutes ahead of schedule, Gloria came through Nadia's door with a wheelchair and Nadia's bag, the pregnancy book inside it, 11 folded pages inside that, and said nothing, because nothing needed to be said. Nadia was already dressed. They moved through the corridor in silence, 2 women and a wheelchair, which is one of the most invisible combinations in any hospital on earth. Nobody notices a nurse moving a patient. That is simply what hospitals look like. The service elevator smelled of industrial cleaner and rumbled on its way down. Nadia sat in the wheelchair with her hands folded in her lap and her chin level and her eyes forward and thought. This is what the beginning of the rest of my life feels like. The loading bay was gray concrete and fluorescent light, and the smell of rain from the delivery doors that opened onto the alley, Comfort's taxi, was exactly where it was supposed to be. They were 3 blocks away when Victor arrived at the hospital. He was told by a nurse at the station who was new enough not to know him by sight that his wife had been discharged that morning. He stood very still for a moment. Then he called Remy. Remy, who had been watching the main entrance, had nothing to report. Victor ended the call and made another one. "Find her," he said, to a man whose name he did not say aloud because he did not say names aloud on phone calls. "She's on foot or in a vehicle. She left the hospital within the last hour. She's pregnant. She won't be moving fast." He was wrong again. Comfort drove the way her mother had taught her to move through the world, with absolute competence and no wasted motion. Nadia had a number. Dr. Akafer had given it to her on a slip of paper the night before, written in the careful handwriting of a woman who understands the weight of what she is writing. A contact number that would route, through 3 separate lines, to an office registered to a private security organization operating under the name OSI Consulting Group. She had memorized the number and given the paper back to Dr. Akafer to be destroyed. She dialed it now, sitting in the back of Comfort's taxi as rain began to streak the windows, her bag on her lap, her hand pressed against her belly where her child moved in slow, submarine circles. It rang twice. A man answered. His voice was even and professional. "OSI Consulting." "My name," Nadia said, her voice surprising her with its steadiness, "is Nadia. I was born Nadia Os. I believe you have been looking for me." Silence on the line, then, very quietly, a sharp intake of breath. Then, "Stay on the line, do not hang up, tell me where you are." And underneath the professionalism, underneath the trained steadiness of a man who controlled large operations and made large decisions, she heard it. Something cracking open, something raw and old and enormous. She told him where she was. "Sending people," he said. "You will be safe, I promise you." A pause. "I've been looking for you for 27 years. Nadia closed her eyes, rain on the windows, the city moving past. "I know," she said. I only just found out. Chapter 5. The father in the shadows, the most dangerous man in the room, never raises his voice. Emmanuel Os did not look like what Victor Hale would have imagined. He was 61 years old, slight in build, with close-cropped gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses, and the careful, measured movements of a man who has learned to conserve everything: energy, words, emotion, because he has understood for a long time that conservation is power. He wore linen shirts. He drank his coffee without sugar. He had a scar below his left ear that he never explained, and a reputation that he never advertised. He had built his organization over 30 years, not from greed, though the organization was extraordinarily profitable, but from a specific and galvanizing mission: to find people who had been taken and return them to those who loved them. He had started because of his daughter. He had continued because, in the course of searching for her, he had discovered how many others were also lost. His network operated across 9 countries. It employed former intelligence officers, retired judges, investigative journalists, forensic accountants, and a technology team that Victor Hale's people could not have dreamed of competing with. He had known about Victor Hale for 4 months. He had known Nadia was in that house for 6 weeks. He had been building the legal case, precisely, surgically, correctly, because Emmanuel Osa had learned the hard way that operations conducted in rage accomplished nothing that lasted. He wanted something that would last. He wanted Victor Hale to lose everything permanently, through legitimate means, with no loophole and no appeal. When the call came from the hospital, and he heard his daughter's voice for the first time in 27 years, he had excused himself from the room full of people waiting on his instructions, walked to the window, pressed his forehead against the glass, and allowed himself 30 seconds of something he had not permitted himself in a very long time. Then he had straightened, turned around, and said, "Accelerate everything. We move now." Nadia arrived at a safe house that afternoon. It was a quiet apartment in a nondescript building, staffed by 2 of Emmanuel's people: a woman named Said, who was an attorney, and a man named Kofi, who was, among other things, a former military medic who spent the first hour confirming that Nadia and the baby were physically stable. Then Said sat across from Nadia at the kitchen table and opened a laptop and said, "I'm going to need you to tell me everything you remember. Take as long as you need." Nadia placed the pregnancy book on the table and opened it to the folded pages. Said looked at the 11 pages of handwritten notes, looked at Nadia, and said, "You did this while you were in the hospital." "Been composing it for 2 years," Nadia said simply. "I was just waiting for the chance to write it down." Victor was, in the meantime, making exactly the kind of noise that Emmanuel Osa had anticipated. He called his lawyers. He filed a missing person report. His wife, heavily pregnant, had gone missing from the hospital, clearly confused, clearly needing care. He was desperate with worry. He said this to the police officer, who took his report with such practiced conviction that the officer had written *concerned husband in his notes. He called in favors. He had several officers on his payroll, not many, just enough, and he directed them to start looking for a pregnant woman moving through the city. He called his own network, spread the description, offered a reward. He also called his lawyer, Marcus Webb, a man who had made a comfortable career out of making Victor's problems disappear through legal mechanisms, and said, "I want to know what my rights are regarding the child." Marcus Webb had said, "If your wife is found and refuses to return, we can seek an emergency custody arrangement. Given that she left voluntarily during a high-risk pregnancy, we can argue she presents a risk to the child's welfare." "Do it," Victor said. He was so focused on the hunt that he did not notice the net that was already closing around him. He did not notice because nets, when built properly, are invisible until they are pulled tight. Emmanuel Osai flew in on a private flight that evening. He did not go to the safe house immediately. He went to the offices of Chambers, Andrew, and Blake, where a woman named Deborah Andrew had been building a legal case file for the past 4 months that now occupied 3 accordion folders, 2 encrypted drives, and a whiteboard that covered an entire wall. Deborah Andrew was 48 years old and had not lost a case in 11 years. She shook Emmanuel's hand, gestured at the whiteboard, and said, We're ready. Emmanuel looked at the whiteboard for a long moment. Every transaction Victor had ever made, every shell company, every payment to every official, the import manifests, the storage facility records, the communications, the timeline of Nadia's confinement built from medical records, from the account of Mrs. Adami 3 doors down, from the pharmacy records of the medications Victor had been collecting that had no legitimate prescription. And my daughter's testimony, Emmanuel asked. Deborah set a hand on the top accordion folder. With what she brought us today, her own notes, we have more than enough. She paused. He has filed for emergency custody of the child. I know, he'll argue she's unstable, that she fled a hospital during a high-risk pregnancy, that she poses a risk. He'll lose that argument, Emmanuel said quietly. Yes, Deborah said. He will. Emmanuel went to the safe house at 9 that evening. Nadia was sitting on the couch with a cup of tea, wearing clothes Said had brought her, looking. And this struck him with a physical force he had not anticipated, so exactly like her mother that he stopped in the doorway for a moment and could not move. She looked at him. He looked at her. 27 years of searching and longing and not knowing and hopping and continuing anyway, because stopping was not something Emmanuel Osei knew how to do. Hello, he said. His voice was steady. Everything else about him in that moment was not. Hello, she said, a pause. Then, because they were both people who understood that some things do not require long preambles. I have your mother's eyes, she said. You're going to tell me that. He let out a breath that was almost a laugh. Yes. He crossed the room and sat in the chair across from her. How are you? Scared, she said honestly. But less than I was this morning. She set down her tea. He's going to fight for the baby. Won't win. You don't know what he's capable of. Emmanuel looked at his daughter, this woman he was only just meeting, this woman who had survived 2 years of captivity through sheer internal fortitude and careful thinking, and said, I know exactly what he's capable of. I've been studying him for 4 months. He leaned forward slightly. But he doesn't know what I'm capable of, and that is the entire difference. The first time in 2 years, Nadia Osei almost smiled. Chapter 6. The courtroom reckoning. Arrogance is always loudest right before the fall. The custody hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning, 12 days after Nadia's disappearance from Cedarwood General. Victor arrived at the courthouse in a dark suit and Italian shoes with Marcus Webb beside him. And he wore the expression he wore in every room he entered, the expression of a man who has already decided the outcome and is simply waiting for events to catch up with his certainty. The courtroom was on the 4th floor of the Family Division building. It was a medium-sized room with high windows and wooden benches, and the particular quality of silence that legal spaces have, the silence of people holding many things unsaid. Nadia was already seated at the plaintiff's table with Deborah Andrew when Victor entered. He looked at her with a practiced expression of concerned relief. There you are, darling, I've been so worried. And she looked back at him with an expression he had never seen on her face before. She was not afraid. He catalogued this, filed it somewhere uncomfortable. Marcus Webb opened for the defendant with the kind of smooth, well-rehearsed confidence that comes from years of winning cases through procedural maneuvering rather than the strength of the actual evidence. Victor Hale was a successful businessman and devoted husband. His wife, in the late stages of a high-risk pregnancy, had made a series of alarming decisions, leaving the hospital against medical advice, disappearing for nearly 2 weeks, refusing contact. He was deeply concerned for her mental health. He sought emergency shared custody to ensure the safety of the child. He had the home, the resources, the stability. He was simply a father trying to protect his unborn child. It was a good performance. Victor, seated at the defendant's table, allowed himself a small internal satisfaction. He glanced at Nadia across the aisle. She was watching Marcus Webb with the same expression she'd had when he walked in. Calm, unshaken. He found this irritating. Deborah Andrew stood up. She was not a dramatic woman. She did not employ the theatrical pauses and raised voice moments that some attorneys used to signal importance. She spoke in a clear, measured tone, and she laid her evidence in order, one piece at a time, the way someone builds a structure that is meant to stand for a very long time. Medical records. Nadia's hospital admission notes, which documented bruising consistent with prolonged restraint on both wrists and one ankle. The attending physician's observations, annotated and certified. Pharmacy records. A pattern of sedative medications collected on Victor Hale's account over a period of 22 months, in quantities inconsistent with any legitimate prescription. Financial records. Payments to 3 different security firms for the installation and maintenance of door and window locking systems in the residential property at 14 Oleander Drive, systems that engaged from the outside. Testimony from Mrs. Adami of 11 Oleander Drive, submitted in affidavit, describing a period of more than a year during which she had never once seen the occupant of number 14 leave the property unaccompanied. And then, Nadia's own written account, 11 pages, every detail, dates, times, names, the cord around her ankle, the sound of the lock, the conversations she had memorized through the wall of the locked office on the second floor. The courtroom had gone very quiet. Victor's jaw had tightened. He wrote something on the notepad in front of him and slid it to Marcus Webb. Marcus Webb read it, and his expression did not change, but his hand, Nadia noticed, had gone still on the table. Then Deborah Andrews said, "Your Honor, I'd like to call my final witness." Door at the back of the courtroom opened. Emmanuel Osei walked in. He was wearing a gray suit and his wire-rimmed glasses, and he moved with the unhurried steadiness of a man who has been in difficult rooms before and has never found a room he could not navigate. Victor looked at him. Something moved across his face. Not recognition. He had never met Emmanuel Osei in person. But something else. The specific, primitive recognition of predator encountering something it cannot categorize. The wrongness of a situation suddenly reclassifying itself in real time. Emmanuel took the stand. Deborah said, "Please state your name and your relationship to the plaintiff for the record." "Emmanuel Osei," he said in his quiet and complete way. "I am Nadia's biological father." Victor's pen dropped onto the notepad. Marcus Webb leaned toward him and whispered something. Victor did not respond. He was looking at Emmanuel Osei with an expression that was doing complicated things. Confusion, recalculation, the beginning of something that in another man might have been called fear. Emmanuel Osei testified for 40 minutes. He described the circumstances of Nadia's disappearance as an infant. He described 27 years of searching. He described the organization he had built in part to continue that search. He described the 4 months of investigation his team had conducted into Victor Hale's activities. Not just the abuse of Nadia, but the broader criminal enterprise, the details of which he presented with the precision of a man who has been building this file carefully and completely. He did not raise his voice once. He did not look at Victor once. He looked at the judge and at Deborah, and occasionally at Nadia, with the steady composure of a man who has prepared for this moment for a very long time and is not about to waste it on theatrics. Marcus Webb attempted a cross-examination. He challenged the admissibility of privately gathered intelligence. He challenged the chain of custody of the financial records. He was technically skilled and professionally composed. Emmanuel Osei answered each challenge in precise, documented detail. By the time Marcus Webb sat down, Victor was no longer writing on his notepad. He was sitting very still, looking at the table in front of him, and the arrogance had left his face so completely that he looked, for the first time, like what he actually was. A man who had mistaken cruelty for power and was only now discovering the difference. The judge, the Honorable Clara Mensah, no relation to Gloria, though fate, as it turns out, has a sense of symmetry called a recess. In the corridor outside, Victor grabbed Marcus Webb by the arm and said, "Who is he? What is he?" Marcus Webb, who had spent the recess on his phone, said, "Emmanuel Osei. His organization has been flagged by Interpol, 3 federal agencies, and the security services of 2 countries, not as a criminal organization, but as a private intelligence entity operating in the recovery of missing persons. He has more government connections than we have lawyers." A pause. "He has also, in the last 4 months, compiled a file on your pharmaceutical import operations that he has apparently submitted to the Organized Crime Division of the Federal Prosecutor's Office." Victor was very still. This morning, Marcus Webb said. This morning, Victor repeated. Before the hearing. Chapter 7. The verdict and the reckoning, everything he built on fear. Fear now took back. The judge returned from recess with an expression that told the room, before she said a word, which direction this was going. She ruled on the emergency custody application first. Victor Hale's petition for emergency shared custody was denied. The evidence of domestic abuse, physical restraint, and coercive control was documented and credible. The medical evidence alone was sufficient. The additional financial and intelligence evidence was corroborating. She issued a full protection order, effective immediately, prohibiting Victor Hale from contacting Nadia Osai or approaching within 500 meters of her or any property where she resided. She referred the broader criminal evidence, the financial records, the import documentation, the intelligence files to the federal prosecutor's office. She recommended a full criminal investigation. Victor sat and listened to all of this with his hands flat on the table and his face a careful, controlled blank, the expression of a man who has decided that showing nothing is the last form of power available to him. It was a small and hollow power, but it was all he had left. Outside the courthouse, on the broad steps in the afternoon light, Nadia stood with Deborah Andrew on one side and Emmanuel on the other, and breathed the open air with the specific quality of attention that people give to things they have been denied. Reporters had gathered. Someone had leaked the outline of the case, and the combination of domestic abuse, hidden identity, private intelligence organization had proven irresistible. Cameras and microphones assembled at the base of the steps. Emmanuel placed a hand briefly on Nadia's shoulder. "You don't have to speak to anyone," he said. "We can go." "I know," she said. She looked at the cameras for a moment. She thought about the other women, the ones still inside houses like 14 Oleander Drive, the ones counting their freedoms like grains of rice, the ones who did not yet know that somewhere someone was looking for them. "I'll say something," she said. She walked to the base of the steps. Deborah walked beside her. She said, "My name is Nadia Osai. I was held in my home by my husband for 2 years. I was restrained at night with a cord around my ankle. I was isolated from the outside world. I was told that trying to leave would have consequences I couldn't survive." She paused. "I want every woman who is living what I live to know. The cord can be removed. The door can be opened. There are people looking for you, even if you can't see them yet. Do not stop believing in the possibility of getting out." She stepped back. Emmanuel was watching her with an expression she was beginning to understand was what 27 years of searching looked like when it finally found what it was looking for. Victor Hale was arrested 6 days later. The charges were extensive: domestic abuse and imprisonment, coercive control, 2 counts of criminal conspiracy relating to the pharmaceutical import operation, tax evasion, and bribery of public officials. Marcus Webb, who had a long career of making problems disappear, discovered that some problems are too large and too well documented to disappear, and quietly withdrew from the case. Victor faced his arraignment in a different courtroom, on a different floor, without his Italian shoes. They had taken those at processing, and without the expression of a man who has already decided the outcome. He was remanded in custody pending trial. The house at 14 Oleander Drive, the cream-colored walls, the wraparound porch, the garden of white roses, was placed under a court order pending asset investigation. The wind chimes above the front door sang in the empty house for several days before someone finally took them down. Nadia's daughter was born on a Sunday morning in April. The labor was 17 hours, attended by a midwife in Gloria Mensa, who had taken personal leave to be there, and Emmanuel, who sat in the waiting room and held a cup of coffee he had not drunk for 4 hours, because some waitings are too significant to do anything but wait through them fully. Nadia named the girl Sola. It meant sunshine in Yoruba. It also meant, "This is where the dark part ends." Chapter 8. The sunlit garden freedom is a place you build, not a place you find. 18 months later. The apartment was on the 5th floor of a building in the older part of the city, with large windows that let in the afternoon light, and a small balcony where tomatoes grew in pots and Sola, now walking with the determined and slightly unsteady urgency of a 14-month-old who has recently discovered locomotion, could stand at the rail and point at the pigeons below with the commanding authority of someone who has opinions about birds. Nadia was at the kitchen table with a laptop and 3 textbooks and a highlighter, working through a module on trauma-informed social work practice. She was in her second year of a graduate degree. She had, her supervisor had told her, a natural understanding of the material, the kind that comes not from textbooks alone, but from having lived adjacent to what the textbooks described. She marked a passage. She made a note. Sola pointed at a pigeon. Outside, the city moved through its afternoon. She met with Emmanuel every Sunday. This was their rhythm, arrived at naturally in the 18 months since the courthouse steps. Sunday lunches at a restaurant they both liked, which served the kind of food that reminded them both, in different ways, of a country and a history they were still learning to share with each other. They were not yet fluent in each other. They were learning. There were conversations that started and stalled and were set aside for next week. And there were conversations that went on for 3 hours without either of them noticing the time. And there was a quality between them that was still fragile in places. 27 years of absence does not disappear because the people involved want it to, but it was also, underneath the fragility, very strong. Built on something real. Emmanuel had learned the sound of Sola's laugh. He carried a photograph of them both in his wallet, Nadia holding Sola in the hospital, both of them still uncertain what the world outside the window would look like, but present and alive. He had been looking for 27 years. He had found more than he had known to hope for. Gloria Mensa came for lunch on a Tuesday in April, the month Sola turned 1. She brought groundnut cake in a paper bag and sat at the kitchen table and looked around the apartment with the satisfaction of a woman reviewing evidence of a good outcome. "Tomatoes are doing well," she said, nodding at the balcony. "Emmanuel has opinions about the watering schedule," Nadia said, pouring tea. "Men always do." Gloria accepted the tea. She looked at Nadia with the direct and uncomplicated regard of someone who has seen you at your lowest and is glad to see you somewhere else entirely. "How is school?" "Hard," Nadia said. "Good, both. The best things are." Sola arrived at Gloria's knee with the focused determination of a child who has identified a target, grabbed her trouser leg with both hands and looked up at her with the expression of someone expecting to be picked up. Gloria picked her up. "She has your eyes," she said to Nadia. "Emmanuel says that too." Nadia wrapped her hands around her mug. "He says I have my mother's eyes, so I suppose she has her grandmother's eyes." A small inheritance. A line of sight passing through generations, through loss, through a long dark corridor, arriving finally in a sunlit apartment where tomatoes grew on the balcony and a child pointed at pigeons, and a woman was learning, piece by piece, the shape of her own life. Victor's trial concluded 11 months after his arrest. Nadia did not attend. She had given her testimony earlier in the proceedings in a closed session, with a screen, on the advice of Deborah Andrew, and she had said what she needed to say clearly and completely. And then she had stepped outside the courthouse and called Emmanuel and said, "It's done," and gone to pick up Sola from the childminder. The verdict came back guilty on 7 of the 9 charges, 22 years. Deborah Andrew sent a message. "He will not touch your daughter's childhood. I promised you that." Asterisk Nadia read the message in the kitchen while Sola ate rice off a small plate with the focused inefficiency of someone still developing their motor skills, and she sat with the information for a long moment, not with satisfaction exactly and not with grief, but with something more complex. The specific weight of a chapter that has been written, completed, and can now be set aside. She put down her phone. She picked up a spoon and helped Sola with the rice. In her second year of the graduate program, Nadia took an elective module on advocacy work with survivors of domestic captivity. The module included a practicum component supervised work with a partner organization that ran a support line for women in coercive control situations. On her third shift, a call came in. The woman on the other end of the line had a voice that was very quiet and very careful. The voice of someone who had learned to take up as little sound as possible. She said she wasn't sure she was calling the right number. She said she wasn't sure she was in a situation that counted as a situation. She said her husband was very good to her most of the time. That's okay, Nadia said. You don't have to know for certain, you can just talk. A long pause. I'm not supposed to use the phone, the woman said. I know, Nadia said. You're using it anyway, that was a brave thing to do. Another pause, then quietly. I don't know how to get out. Nadia set down her pen. She thought about a hospital window and rain and a taxi in a service bay and a nurse who had noticed the right thing and done something about it. She thought about 11 pages of careful handwriting. She thought about a man with wire-rimmed glasses who had never stopped looking. I'm going to help you figure that out, she said. We have time. Tell me what you can. On a Sunday afternoon in June, Nadia brought Sola to the restaurant where she and Emmanuel had their weekly lunch, and they sat at their usual table by the window. And Emmanuel ordered the same thing he always ordered and argued mildly about whether the tomatoes in her apartment needed more water. And Sola consumed an entire bread roll with the methodical joy of someone who has not yet encountered a meal that wasn't interesting. After a while, Emmanuel said, Your supervisor says you're exceptional at the advocacy work. Said that to you? She emailed me. Apparently she thought I should know. He looked at his coffee. She said you have the ability to make people feel that being found is possible, even when they've stopped believing it. Nadia was quiet for a moment. It is possible, she said. I know that specifically. Emmanuel looked at her. The afternoon light came through the window and moved across the table between them. This table they had been building, meal by meal, Sunday by Sunday. This ordinary and extraordinary table that belonged to a father and a daughter and the granddaughter between them who was currently attempting to remove the lid from the sugar bowl. Yes, Emmanuel Ose said, his quiet voice carrying everything it needed to carry. You do. Sola got the lid off, sugar went everywhere. Both of them started laughing. Outside, the city went about its afternoon. Somewhere in it, women were counting their freedoms like grains of rice. Somewhere in it, other people were looking for them. And at a table by a window, in the particular democracy of sunlight that does not distinguish between those who have suffered and those who have not, a family that had been apart for 27 years was learning what it felt like to simply be together. To be, against all odds and evidence and the cruelty of certain men in certain houses, simply and completely free. Please subscribe, like, share, turn on notifications so you never miss a story. The ENDNEXT.